Tonight on Primetime Politics, a matter of confidence.
This will be a carbon tax referendum, a carbon tax election.
Conservatives table a motion to bring down the Trudeau government, but without the NDP or the Bloc, the motion will fail. So why move ahead with it now? We'll speak to Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Also, we'll talk to the NDP Whip about her party's decision to continue supporting minority Liberals even after making a dramatic show of ripping up the Supply and Confidence Agreement. And a global space race worth billions of dollars for Canada. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, as promised, Conservatives used their first opposition day this session to introduce a motion of non-confidence in hopes of bringing the government down. In a 20-minute speech this morning, Pierre Poilievre laying out what he sees as government failures, food banks, low productivity, and the carbon tax, and in an effort to win support for his party's motion, outlined what Conservatives would do in place of the Liberals. This includes addressing the national debt, according to Pierre Poilievre, and restoring what the Conservative leader calls the promise of Canada.
We will unleash the construction of homes by incentivizing municipalities to grant faster permits, free up land, and speed up and to cut development taxes so that we can build in safe neighborhoods with jail, not bail, for repeat violent offenders, to bring home the promise of Canada, of a powerful paycheck that earns affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods where anyone from anywhere can do anything.
So a very campaign-like speech ahead of any campaign that we heard in the House today. And to talk about this, we're now joined by the Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Mr. Scheer, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Listen, we know that no other party is going to support your motion. So what's the point of tabling this motion before working with parliamentary colleagues to build some type of consensus on something?
Well, you know, we took the NDP at their word when stuntman Jagmeet Singh had an incredible display of theatrics where he ripped up the agreement with the Liberals and said that it was too weak and too tired and too beholden to corporate interests to continue governing. So we thought that he would actually back up his words with action and voting non-confidence. We've heard similar statements from the Bloc Québécois saying that this government is putting all kinds of on pressures on social programs and not respecting provincial jurisdiction, becoming a very centralizing government. So what we're really asking the other parties is, why go through the charade? Why go through all those theatrics if at the end of the day it was all just a stunt? So today we took the opportunity to highlight the reasons why we believe there should be a carbon tax election where Canadians can make the decision for themselves, because we look around and we see the effects of 9 years of NDP Liberal governments. Housing costs have doubled. The carbon tax is being hiked year after year. Tent cities are popping up in communities that never had them before, and there are now government-funded hard drugs like fentanyl and opioids being distributed in our community. So we believe that Canadians don't want to live under this terrible Liberal government anymore, and that they should have the choice to chart the course for the future. So that's why we moved the motion today.
Okay, so those are the arguments you're making, but to hear it from New Democrats, they openly question why they should be supporting this motion when your party did not support the dental care program that they built with the Liberals, that they're concerned about pharmacare that's not yet received royal assent. How do you answer those concerns from New Democrats if, in fact, and you do, need their support to bring this government down?
Well, let's remember that this is about whether or not the other political parties have confidence in the Liberal government. When Jagmeet Singh made that display pretending like the deal was off, he didn't seem to have any concerns about other factors. He said enough was enough, the government is too corrupt and too weak to continue. So he is now going to reverse himself and turn himself into a complete hypocrite by just a short time, about 3 weeks after making that declaration. He's now going to rush along and protect Justin Trudeau from the verdict of Canadians. So yeah, that's really a question for Mr. Singh about what happened in the last 3 weeks for him to do a complete reversal and embarrass himself in such a humiliating fashion.
Now, that is your criticism of New Democrats. I'm wondering what your response is to the Liberal government, though, because, for example, you talk about the carbon tax, wanting this to be a carbon tax election, and Liberals have clearly said, at the end of the day, the carbon tax is also a carbon rebate, which is helping Canadians to make life more affordable, and to cut the tax is to cut that rebate to Canadians. Is that not a concern that should be raised?
Well, let's keep in mind, as the Parliamentary Budget Officer has pointed out, that the vast majority of Canadian families pay far more in the carbon tax than anything they might hope to get back.
Although Liberals say 8 out of 10 Canadians get more than they pay out.
And they are excluding a very important part of the cost. See, what the Liberals don't want to tell you, and what they don't want you to know, is that all the knock-on effects, the secondary effects in the economy as trucking costs go up, as heating stores becomes more expensive for retailers, all those extra costs get passed down onto the consumer. So you might not see it as a line item on your fuel bill or on your home heating bill, but as prices go up, as all those other aspects of the economy have to pass on the cost, that you end up paying that too. And Canadians don't get to pick and choose what part of the carbon tax they pay. The Liberals are picking and choosing which parts of the carbon tax they want you to think about, but at the end of the day, it all comes out of your pocket. And let's keep in mind another very important factor here. The choice is not between whether or not to axe the tax with the Conservatives and keep it where it is with the NDP and Liberals. The Liberal NDP plan, when fully implemented, and when you add in Carbon Tax 2.0, which is the fuel standards, which will add another enormous layer of costs on Canadians, it will push up the total cost of the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. That's going to have a devastating impact on the economy. Just the trucking costs alone, the Canadian Truckers Association has said that right now the carbon tax is taking $2 billion out of the economy. As it increases, that'll come up to $4 billion. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government's own department has acknowledged that the total cost of the carbon tax will take over $30 billion out of the economy. So again, Canadians don't get to pick and choose which parts of the carbon tax they have to pay. They have to pay for all of it. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed when you factor all of that in, Canadians are worse off. So when we axe the tax, prices will come down and Canadians will be further ahead.
Okay, so axe the tax is the argument you're making. Although, your leader also in the House today talked about cutting back bureaucracy in order to get back to a balanced budget. And the NDP basically say that is about cutting programs that Canadians need. Just how deeply will your party have to cut to get us back to balance?
Right. Well, what the NDP and Liberals never want to talk about is how Canadians are having to cut back themselves. Many Canadians are cutting back on the quality and quantity of food that they buy at the grocery store. I've seen tragic scenes where people in a grocery store that have jobs but are struggling with the cost of living crisis pick up something, look at the sticker, and have to put it back. So Canadians are making cuts because of this government's inflationary policies and high interest rates that have come along with it. But the NDP and Liberals never also want to talk about the government waste. The $35 billion infrastructure bank that hasn't completed a single project. The hundreds of millions of dollars that this government has funneled to high-priced consultants to duplicate work that our public service is already doing. Those are the types of areas that we can easily find savings for Canadians that won't affect core services, that won't affect the quality of services that Canadians depend on, and yet will allow us to provide other types of relief for working families. We currently live in a Canada after 9 years of the Trudeau Liberals where hard work is punished, people are taxed to death, they're not feeling safe in their communities, young people are giving up on the dream of home ownership because housing costs have doubled. And life wasn't like this just 9 years ago. This has all been the result of the Liberal government's policies. So again, I put the onus back on the NDP and Bloc. It's not that this government is failing to respond or that they don't have a plan to get us through troubled times because of external factors that have come to Canada. The problems facing Canadians are a direct result of the extreme and wacko ideological policies of this Liberal government supported by the NDP. And what we're hearing from Canadians from across the country is enough is enough. They don't want to put up with this anymore. They don't believe that they should be suffering and feeling this kind of misery at the hands of their own government. And we want Canadians to have that choice in a carbon tax election.
Okay, to make that choice clearer though, you outlined these alternate areas where you might find savings. National child care, national pharmacare, national dental care. Are those on the chopping block if your party becomes government?
I know that there's a lot of interest in what the Conservative platform might look like. We're still a long way away from that, it seems, because of decisions of the NDP and Liberal and Bloc to keep the Liberals in power. We will have a comprehensive platform that will show Canadians exactly where we are going to get back to balanced budgets. And I just point out that when previous Conservative governments have been in power, if we look back to the previous Conservative government, we were able to provide tax relief, we were able to eliminate all kinds of government waste, and we were able to strengthen core services. Healthcare transfers under the previous Conservative government went up every single year that we were in office, and so Canadians can have confidence that core services will be protected as we eliminate wasteful and inflationary liberal waste.
Andrew Scheer, thank you for the time.
Thanks very much.
Well, let's get some reaction now from the NDP. Heather McPherson is the party's whip, and she joins us right now. Ms. McPherson, thank you for being here.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. Listen, I'm going to get your reaction first and foremost to what we heard from Pierre Poilievre this morning in the House, because by choosing to vote against their motion, he essentially accuses your party of, and these are his words, letting thousands more people die, letting thousands more lose their homes, allowing thousands more to get addicted to what he calls government-funded drugs, and he ties those outcomes to government programs. So how do you answer that type of criticism, again, accusing you of letting bad things happen to Canadians?
Oh, I mean, Pierre Poilievre is frankly a very, very deeply unserious politician. He is not truthful. He constantly lies within the House of Commons. He constantly makes things up, uses hyperbole. Canadians can see what he's doing. This is a deeply unserious man who is trying to get some clips for his social media so he can continue to tell people that everything's the worst and everything is broken. It's disingenuous. It's very damaging to our democracy, and it's dangerous.
Except that, when you look at the polling numbers and the polling numbers of this last year, Poilievre and his party do have a double-digit lead on all parties, including yours. Can you really afford to ignore, the arguments that he's making when so many Canadians apparently are finding resonance in his message?
Listen, I'm going to continue to every single day point out the hypocrisy of the Conservative Party of Canada. I'm going to continually talk about those things that we know Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives will cut. I'm an Albertan. I'm seeing what's happening right now in Alberta with Danielle Smith. It is absolutely clear that Pierre Poilievre will cut healthcare. He will cut dental care, child care. There is no plan on dealing with our climate crisis. This is the person he is, and this is who I think Canadians need to recognize. And my hope is that when it comes time to elections, polls are not what's important. Election day is what's important. And on election day, I have a lot of faith that Canadians will see through the rhetoric, the slogans, the bumper stickers, the very strong alliteration of Pierre Poilievre.
But he does also make another point, and not just him, but other Conservatives. They call it hypocrisy and wonder how your party can support a government that your own leader has accused of being too beholden to corporate interests to fight for the average Canadian. How do you answer that criticism?
Well, we have a situation right now where we have both the Liberals and the Conservatives that are very much beholden to corporate influence. We've seen this in both circumstances, but for Pierre Poilievre to come forward and say we have no confidence in the government, whatever. I'm also have no confidence in Pierre Poilievre, and I am not going to in any way listen to him or support any of the things that he's trying to do within the House. It's something we've seen time and time again. You need to be able to work collaboratively. You need to be able to work with people. He is a divisive, dangerous man for our country, for our democracy, and we won't be taking any marching orders or any lessons from somebody like Pierre Poilievre.
Now, pharmacare is expected to get royal assent next month. Seniors expected to be eligible for, more seniors eligible for dental care by the new year. And of course, those are two big policy platforms that your party wanted out of the supply and confidence agreement. So is it safe to say that your party will continue to support the Trudeau Liberals until those initiatives are accomplished and more settled?
Well, we've been really clear. We will look at each vote. We're an opposition party. We will look at each vote as it comes. If there is benefits for Canadians, if there are things that will help Canadians, then we will vote for that. If there are things that will hurt Canadians, if there are things that we don't support, then we won't. I mean, that's what opposition parties should do. Pierre Poilievre votes against everything just out of principle because otherwise his narrative of everything is broken won't work. But we are going to find ways that we can get help for Canadians. And of course, the dental care program, the pharmacare program, those are NDP platform programs. Those are the things that, the Conservatives and the Liberals voted against until we were able to force the government to do those things. If we can continue to get support for Canadians, we'll continue to support. We'll continue to do that.
Okay, support Canadians. I hear what you're saying, but there are also 2 elections this October where New Democrats are fighting and stand a good chance of winning, one in British Columbia, the other in Saskatchewan. Do those elections figure into your party's decision to let Parliament stand for now?
So I think you forgot one. The election that we had just recently, the by-election in Elmwood-Transcona, which we were able to hold on to and able to win, despite the fact that the Conservatives basically threw everything they could at it. So clearly, New Democrats are in the running when we were able to elect a new member for Elmwood-Transcona, and we're really close in the Montreal by-election as well, with a seat that was supposed to be a Liberal safe seat. We are ready to go to an election any time, and I think right now we're making a pretty darn good case that New Democrats are the ones that can push back against Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre wasn't even in the running in Montreal. He's not even there, and the Liberals lost a safe seat. Monday, the by-election, was a pretty good day for New Democrats.
What did the provincial campaigns affect at all your decision right now to support the government?
So the provincial campaigns will run. They'll do what they do, but we're ready to have an election at any time.
Okay. Heather McPherson, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.
Well, time now for a look at what happened in politics today.
We need to make sure that civilians are protected. The violence needs to stop. The women, the children killed in Lebanon is extraordinarily concerning.
The Prime Minister spoke out today on the loss of life in Lebanon, calling for de-escalation as Israel and the militant group Hezbollah continue to exchange fire. On Monday, Israeli forces carried out hundreds of airstrikes on Hezbollah positions, which officials in Lebanon say killed hundreds of people, including women and children. Monday was the deadliest day in Lebanon since 2006. In Ottawa, Conservatives tabled their motion of non-confidence, beginning the morning in the House of Commons with a campaign-like speech from the Conservative leader.
But that promise, after 9 years of the NDP Liberal Prime Minister, is broken. Everything costs more, with 2 million people lined up at food banks because they cannot afford food.
The motion will be voted on Wednesday, and in making his arguments today, Pierre Poilievre outlined several priorities for his party, among them cutting the carbon tax and cutting bureaucracy to balance the budget, to which the Prime Minister had this to say.
Pierre Poilievre, that doesn't want to invest in Canadians, wants to cut the services, the programs, the investments that Canadians are going to rely on to build success into the coming years. And that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
Meanwhile, the government has another labor dispute on their hands. Grain terminal workers at the Port of Vancouver are now officially on strike. According to Grain Growers of Canada, approximately 52% of all grain produced in this country goes through the Vancouver terminal, and they estimate the work stoppage will result in $35 million in lost exports a day. The Labour Minister, Steve McKinnon, on social media stated the two sides have agreed to resume negotiations alongside federal mediators.
We have seen firsthand what hate does. And when we look at the pain and damage that hate causes, one thing is clear. We cannot allow hate to go unchecked. The cost of inaction is far too great.
That was Diversity and Inclusion Minister Kamala Kara during an announcement launching Canada's action plan on hate. The initiative includes grant money for organizations at risk to implement security. Over $270 million over 6 years was allocated for the plan in this year's budget. The plan also promising to provide more support to victims of hate and enhance research and data collection on hate crimes. StatsCan says there has been a jump in police-reported hate crimes by 145% since 2019. And finally, as we mentioned earlier, the Prime Minister is in New York for the UN General Assembly. But last night, Justin Trudeau found time to make an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. While cracking jokes with the U.S. comedian, Trudeau also talked about his unpopularity in the polls here at home.
People are frustrated, and you know, the idea that that maybe they want an election now is something that my opponents are trying to bank on, because you know, people are taking a lot out on me for understandable reasons. I've been here and I've been steering us through all these things, and people are sometimes looking at change. But the reality is, I deeply believe in continuing to fight climate change and continuing to invest in people, continuing to be there to support people, and I'm going to keep fighting it.
From the launch of the Alouette satellite in the 1960s to the development of Telesat and the Canadarm, Canada has a long history in space, and that tradition does continue, with space industries in this country contributing billions to the national economy. But there is potential for more, which is why Space Canada is holding its third annual conference this week in Ottawa, coming together to share ideas and to lobby leaders about the importance of investing in space industries. Now, yesterday, I did speak about the conference with former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant, who these days heads up Space Canada. Brian Gallant, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Now, you know, we should say that Space Canada represents some 80 different entities, corporations, NGOs, all in the space sector. And when we talk about that, you know, I think what's probably frustrating for people in the sector is that when you ask the average Canadian what is the economic advantage, very few people would answer space. Does that frustrate you?
So in a way, sure, but you got to put in context, and we get it. Space is so fascinating, and every time there's an exploration mission, whenever there's an astronaut going to space, when we have somebody like CSA astronaut Jeremy Hansen that's a part of the Artemis mission, that takes up all the space, pardon the pun, and all the oxygen, pardon the pun. So we get that, and we're proud of that, and we hope it inspires people to be curious about STEM, curious about science, curious about our universe, and also curious about space, including the space sector. Because you're right to say that although that takes up a lot of the space, there's so much going on when it comes to economic activity for space, and it's increasing in importance. And over the next few years, there's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars added to the space sector, globally speaking, and Canada, I think, can set itself up to reap some of those opportunities, seize those opportunities with our rich history in space. Okay,
let's build on that, because, you know, for the past few years, Space Canada has been lobbying the government to come up with a National Space Council. Budget 24 comes out, money set aside to essentially create that for this country. What is the economic advantage of having a Space Council?
So it's interesting. I mean, it's not a very kind of sexy item because it's governance.
Maybe for Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly. In the bubble, maybe. But it's really a governance question that is important. So, you know, 60 years ago when we were doing things in space, humanity was venturing, and it was government-led. It was all government-funded. Over the years, there's, of course, some businesses that started to get into space, but now there's a real emergence of a commercialization of space. The functions of space can really have an impact on our economy, on our environment, on our social fabric. It can help connectivity in rural, remote, indigenous, northern communities. I mean, there's just so many applications that will better our lives on Earth. So with that in mind, we certainly would like to have the government be able to kind of get their ducks in a row when at a time when the governance of space has changed immensely for everyone, not just Canada. So the U.S. created a National Space Council. It has served to bring cabinet ministers, secretaries in their case, to the table, bring all the right people. In their case, they bring the vice president, and they make decisions regarding space policy, space investments, national security questions from a space point of view. So we've been advocating for the same thing. Now, after that, we'll like to see the government create a commercial space strategy. We'd like to see some investments. There's all that good stuff. But we also recognize we just sort of got to figure out the governance of space, given it's such an emerging market and it's morphed so much over the last few years.
Okay, so the establishment of the council, the money's been set aside, obviously work to do. But at the end of the day, when you talk about, for example, an economic advantage, just how large of an economic advantage are we talking about? Because at the end of the day, Canada is a country of 41 million people. We're not that large.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's actually a report released by Deloitte earlier this year. We worked with them on this report, and they were looking at the economic opportunity. And essentially, there's predictions that from now to 2040, the global space sector would be $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Right now, it's a few hundred billion. So it's projected to grow immensely over the next decade and a half. If Canada, according to Deloitte, could seize the same percentage that it has of the global GDP, as in 2040, when it comes to space, we'd have a $40 billion space industry by 2040. So 40 by 40, which is pretty catchy. So we really like that because that's not even sort of punching above our weight. That's literally just saying, hey, Canada, why don't we look at this emerging industry about to be $1 trillion, potentially $2 trillion a year, and just grab the percentage that we already have of the global economy. So it's not even saying let's go that far out and out, sort of stretch our abilities. This is really just get the same weight of our kind of current standing in the global economy. So $40 billion by 2040 is pretty catchy, and I think it would be achievable and it would make a real impact.
And I guess the proviso is so long as the government keeps the eye, like the prize in the eye type of thing.
Totally. And I think, the National Space Council is why we've advocated for it. We got to start with that, and we get it. So then after that, we commercial space strategy, figure out how other countries are investing in the industrial base of the space sector. How are they encouraging space businesses to be a part of some of the government programming, or maybe they're buying services and products from space companies instead of it all being sort of government-led as we sort of created archaically a few decades ago. That's just not the model that'll work now. So let's figure all that out. Let's look at procurement for space. Defense and space are sort of notoriously long procurement processes. Space is so innovative that if you're not quick and sort of asking for something and buying it, purchasing it, it's going to be outdated already by the time you get it. And we'd love really to see investments in startups, scale-ups, and our primes, our big businesses as well.
Are we late to the game, though? Because, when you look at this moment in time in history, traditionally it's been the Americans and the Russians. We have in the last few years seen China ramp up. We have seen India ramp up their space programs, even Japan ramping up the space programs. Are we behind the curve here? Are we too late to the game?
Yeah, it's such an important question because first off, let's just start off with those countries that you mentioned. We should all be asking ourselves, those that can't work in space, figuratively speaking, like I do every single day, if you see these things happening with these countries investing and putting out programs for space, you got to ask yourself, well, why are they doing it, right? There must be some type of opportunity that they're after, and we're certainly trying to communicate as best we can to all key stakeholders here in Canada. There is mass opportunity, again, not just economic, to help fight climate change, to help protect our coast, to help protect our forests, our oceans, all these very important applications that we can do from space. So really, we as a country have had a rich history. We should be really proud of that. But every other country is now realizing that there are opportunities in space and they're stepping up. So we can't be complacent. I think, the exact numbers, a few decades ago, 30 years ago or so, there was, I think, six spacefaring nations with space agencies. Now people are saying it's up to 90. So you see people really stepping up, and if Canada kind of sits around and says, we were very good, we did the Canada arm, we have all these sort of impressive things, that's all really good, and it shows that we're capable of doing it. But if we don't make the investments, if we don't get together through a National Space Council and figure this out, you're right to say the opportunities will pass us by.
Okay. Well, things to consider as Spacebound gets underway. Brian Gallant, thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
And that is our program for this Tuesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.